it is the fifth consecutive week that House Republicans have decided to stay home. And astoundingly, Speaker Mike Johnson yesterday claimed that his members, while staying at home on an extended vacation, were doing, in his words, some of the most meaningful work of their careers, which really is a joke.
The House Republicans are doing some of the most meaningful work of their career.
The meaningful work that is to be done is bipartisan negotiation around protecting health care for millions of Americans. The reality that I've heard from many of my constituents is that if we don't take action collectively to continue the tax credits that are provided for those on the Affordable Care Act, that millions of Americans are going to lose their health insurance. They're simply not going to be able to afford the care that they need. And some real world examples in my district, hearing from constituents just these past few days. One woman told me that her premiums were going from about $100 a month to over $300 a month. Another woman said that for her family of four, their care was going to over double to around $55,000 a year. These are typical stories from real constituents. And if we don't act, roughly 600,000 Californians and millions of Americans, 4 to 5 million Americans, are going to be priced out of health insurance. What that will mean is if you have millions more uninsured, those costs are going to have to be picked up by the overall healthcare system. These people, their families, are still going to need care, particularly acute care. What they're going to lack is the preventative care that ultimately will be less expensive for the system overall. The acute care will be more expensive for the system, and ultimately we all bear the cost of that. The other thing that happened is Donald Trump, President Trump, who hasn't really been present or visible in any of these discussions around the shutdown, he said the other day that he was not only the president, but now he said he's the speaker and the president. Now, of course, his people said that he was joking, but the reality is that that was a pretty accurate statement by Donald Trump, because Mike Johnson has effectively ceded control of the House of Representatives and John Thune, not much better in the United States Senate, to Donald Trump. He is now really the unitary executive that Republicans, some on the far right, the Freedom Caucus folks, the Russell Votes of the world, they've been dreaming about this for a very long time, for a wholly powerful unitary executive. And that's exactly what Mike Johnson and John Thune have given to Donald Trump. The founders did not intend for this. They intended for the opposite. They wanted strong checks and balances, and they wanted Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate, to function as a fully co-equal branch of government. As Madison wrote in Federalist 51, ambition would check ambition, meaning the ambition of the Congress would check the ambition of any president who would act as an authoritarian. That is not happening today. What is happening between the Supreme Court saying that anything Donald Trump does in the context of his official capacity is immune from any sort of penalty, in Mike Johnson and John Thune effectively ceding the House and the Senate to the executive. What all this has meant is that Donald Trump is basically free at the present moment to do whatever he pleases. And what they are doing right now is they're allowing for millions and millions of Americans to lose their health insurance. They're allowing for millions and millions of Americans to go hungry. Let me speak about that for a minute. So the SNAP program, sometimes known as food stamps, helps 42 million Americans across the country have enough food to eat. And that includes roughly 5.5 million Californians. I'm on the Appropriations Committee. And what I will tell you is that we had planned for emergencies, for a contingency amount of funds to be set aside. We set aside $3 billion in fiscal year 24 and $3 billion in fiscal year 25 for SNAP to continue to function even during a government shutdown, for people to have enough to eat even during a government shutdown. So the USDA, the Department of Agriculture, is sitting right now on around $6 billion, maybe a little bit less, but around $6 billion that is there for this specific purpose, to make sure that people have enough to eat. Because the amount of money for the normal SNAP program, that runs out at the end of this month, at the end of October. But if the Trump administration were to tap into those contingency funds, the roughly $5 to $6 billion in contingency funds, that would easily last several more weeks as we try to negotiate an end to the government shutdown. The administration has decided to create another crisis. They created the healthcare crisis by canceling the tax credits that help bring healthcare premiums down. And now they are unilaterally deciding, because they've been given that power by Johnson, they've been given that power by John Thune, they are unilaterally deciding not to spend the $5 or $6 billion that Congress appropriated for this specific reason. And the result is that millions of Americans are going to go hungry needlessly. It's cruel, it's inhumane, and it's reflective of what I've said, which is that Mike Johnson is the weakest speaker in the history of the House of Representatives. It's not something I say lightly. For 40 days, his members have been out of town. He claims they're doing meaningful work. The meaningful work is to be done right here. And I am ready, willing to negotiate with anyone, anybody on the Republican side, to save health care for millions of Americans, to make sure that people have enough to eat, to make sure that our military continues to be paid, to make sure that our federal workers continue to be paid and they're not arbitrarily fired by the tens of thousands. It's all coming to a head. And the last thing I'll say is this. This Friday, Halloween, October 31st, is when members of Congress will get paid, unless we write a letter to House administration saying, don't pay us, which I did. I wrote that letter. I said, pending or during a government shutdown, do not pay me as normal. Many of my colleagues have not written such a letter, and they're going to get paid this Friday, October 31st, as though all is normal. But their staff that work for them, they're not going to get paid. What kind of boss takes their paycheck while letting their staff get stiffed? It's absolutely unconscionable, and everybody should be outraged about that. So until next time, I am here in DC. I remain, again, ready and willing to negotiate with any Republican, but they've actually got to be physically present to do any sort of negotiating, and they haven't been for 5 weeks now. It's a disgrace. Thank you.